Are you ready to have your website get found by the right people? Are you looking to rank at the top of Google so you get more traffic to your website? Are you ready to learn how to use SEO and content marketing to grow your organic traffic? If so, you are in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the Simple SEO Content Podcast. Hi, and welcome back to the Simple SEO Podcast. Today, I want to address a question that I've gotten quite often since I've started talking about podcast SEO, and that is, how do you start a podcast? Like, if I'm a beginner and I'm hearing about SEO and podcast SEO and I'm excited about it and like the idea, but I don't have a podcast yet, how do I figure out how to start one, Rachel? So let's jump right in. If you don't yet have a podcast for your business, then I want you to think about adding one, because a podcast is a really good way to connect with your audience, and it allows you to connect and build a better relationship than just having static content or words on a page does, like your blog. Now, your blog is still going to be incredibly important from a search engine optimization standpoint to get traffic to your website to help people find you. But your podcast can really help you nurture that connection once they find you. They start to like you, they start to know you a little bit better, and they start to trust you. And because of that, it can really, really help your business grow. So when you're starting a podcast, I want you to think about a couple things. One is, are you starting a podcast because you want to do it for fun, or are you starting it because you want it to help your business? You want it to be part of your marketing funnel. You want to use it to bring people into your world and to connect with them. So that's your first question is this going to be for fun or is it for business? If it's for fun, you can take a very different approach than if it's for business. If it's for business, you really want to be strategic with it, and you want to make sure that you choose the best topics and the best name and all of that so that it really can succeed and grow. If you're just doing it for fun, for entertainment, just you and a friend are doing it, or you're doing it on your own, you don't have to take quite the same strategic approach with it. So then I want you to think about, what are you going to cover on your podcast? Now, I generally recommend that you choose like 4 areas that are related to your core subject or your business, what services you offer, what products you sell, etc., when it's for a business, because that allows us to really touch on content that's going to be interesting to your audience. It's going to be helpful. It's going to provide value. And it's also going to make sure that the people who are finding the podcast are interested in the subject that that your business does, that you sell, the products, the services, etc. So we really want to make sure that we're staying in our own lane and we're picking areas that make sense for our ideal customer. So like, for example, my podcast, I generally talk about search engine optimization for your website. I talk about search engine optimization for your blog. I talk about SEO for your podcast. I talk about email list building. And I talk a little bit about sales funnels. And the reason that I do that is that's what I have experience in. It's where my background is, but it's also what I teach and what I sell. So I offer a course on SEO that's for your website and your blog. I offer a course on podcast SEO. I am developing a course on email list building, and I will be developing a course or a group coaching program. I'm not 100% sure, but I will be developing a program on creating a profitable sales funnel as well. So that's what I teach on, because it all ties back to the business. And so I want you to think about that. What you want to talk about? What are you an expert in? What ties back to your business, etc. Then I want you to think about, what are you going to name your podcast? It's going to be important, especially if you're doing this for business. You want to choose a name that isn't super closely related to any other podcast names out there. You don't want to choose a name that somebody else is already using. So make sure you're checking in the podcast apps to be sure that you're not picking something that someone else has. And you want to try to use a keyword in there. And we've talked a lot about keywords and what they are. Keywords are words that your ideal customer would use when searching. So if you choose a podcast name that has a keyword in it, you have a better chance of ranking in the podcast apps. And that means you're going to have a better chance of people finding you. So for example, my podcast name is Simple SEO. SEO is obviously the main keyword there. I went with Simple SEO because my branding for my business is all simple podcast SEO, simple SEO content, simple list building, simple email marketing, etc. Everything has that simple name with it. So that's why the podcast is Simple SEO. You really want to think about what keywords your ideal customer would use. Now, if you're, say, a parenting coach and you're a parenting coach for a specific niche or specific age group, you want to use those keywords in your podcast name as well. So if you work with parents of toddlers, parents of newborns, tweens, children on the spectrum, etc., you want to incorporate that because that's another great keyword that's going to help somebody find your podcast. And when they find your podcast and they listen, you're able to help them. Now I want you to think about what kind of episodes you want to create on your podcast. Do you want to do solo shows? That's what I do. I do solo shows where it's me teaching something, and I try to keep them really short so that they're quick and they're actionable for you. Do you want to do interviews? Do you want to share coaching calls? A mix of all of the above. It really is up to you. It's your choice what you're comfortable with. I don't do interviews on here because they don't work really well with my audience, but also interviews lead to more scheduling challenges and hassles and people scheduling and rescheduling and changing. And I do the podcast and I try to batch my episodes once a month. And so it's easier for me just to be able to set aside an hour or two to record my podcast episodes versus having to try to coordinate with other people and do interview episodes. So think about which format you like, what you want to do, if you want to have multiple people on, if you want to do all interviews, if you want to do it yourself, whatever you want. There is no wrong answer. You just need to choose what's going to work for the best for you. The other thing you want to think about is how long are your episodes going to be? So personally, because I'm doing SEO on my podcast and I want it to be discovered by new people, I make my episodes short and sweet. My aim is for 10 to 15 minutes because think about it from the listener perspective. If somebody new is looking in the podcast app and they're seeing my show and it says it's 47 minutes or it's an hour and a half, they're less likely to commit to listening to that than if it says it's 10 minutes or it's 12 minutes. It's easier to get somebody, it's a smaller lift. It's like, oh, okay, this is a 10-minute episode. Let me check it out and see what it's about. That does make a difference. So we do want to think about how long is our ideal podcast episode. I really would not recommend an hour because most people aren't going to listen for an hour unless it's really super engaging. The next thing you want to think about is what are your episodes going to be about? So we talked about what type content you're going to have, what categories, but now you really want to think about what are the actual episode names? What are you actually going to talk about? So what I do is I do a mix of things when I'm looking for ideas. I look for content that I can create. I look for blog posts that I have that don't have a podcast episode where I can update that because I've had my blog for 5 years longer than I've had the podcast. So there are blog posts that I've created that are really great that don't yet have a podcast episode. So that's part of it. I look for keywords I'd like to rank for. I look for questions that I get from my listeners. I look to see what some of the competition is doing. Is there something that they've addressed that maybe I haven't addressed that I should look at? And I also look at what performs the best over time. What type episodes does my audience like the best? That's what I create. So when you sit down to do your content calendar, I want you to think about that and really make sure, okay, I'm under the blogging bucket. What type podcast episode could I create about blogging that would be the most helpful to my audience and have the best chance of ranking? Then You want to think about how you're going to title your episodes. And it's going to be important to use keywords. Not only are you using keywords in your podcast name, but now you want to use keywords in your episode title because again, the keyword is what somebody's going to be searching for. So that's visibility. It's just helping you get your podcast episode found by new listeners. That's really all it is. If you're not sure how to do all of this, I want you to get the Beginner's Guide to Podcast SEO. It's on my website at the freebies tab. That's etchedmarketing.com/freebies. That's going to have more insights and information along with a checklist that'll kind of help you make sure you're doing what you need to do for podcast SEO. Then you may be wondering, what equipment do I need? Hey, Rachel, how do you actually record it? So I record my podcast using a program called Descript. I like it because it's easy to use. You record right into it. You can do your audio and your video. There's an editor in there so you can clean up if there's issues, if you struggle with ums and ahs. Like that, it can clean it up for you. I have that issue because I went to journalism school and in my public speaking class, our teacher teased that she was going to beat the ums and ahs out of us, but she did. So you'll very seldom hear me say or ah. But if you struggle with something like that, Descript can help you. They clean it up. They take care of all of that. And then I use Buzzsprout to host my podcast. So that's where I actually export the file. And I like the fact that there's an integration from Descript straight to Buzzsprout so that I don't play with any more technical programs than necessary because you guys know I'm not the most technical. I don't want to be the most technical. I do also use a high quality microphone for the podcast so that I have better audio because audio quality is really important to listeners. So I do have a Shure microphone. I did buy that and invest in it specifically when I was launching the podcast. But at that time, I had enough money coming in from the business to be able to afford to do that without taking it out of like my personal account. If you have the money to invest in a good microphone, I highly recommend that. You can pick whatever price point you want, do a little bit of research. There are different microphones that are highly recommended for podcasting. The Shure, I believe it's the MV7 is the one that I have, but there are other options. I like this one. I think it's really good. I've been using it for 2 years, going on the 3rd year. So that's really at is like, what are we doing? We're going to create a podcast. We're going to record it. We're going to use a program to record it and a program to host it. I do recommend that you pay for something like Descript and Buzzsprout. It just makes it easier for you. It's not expensive and it's going to help you stay current on it because you're not having to try to piece it all together. We're not MacGyvering this, you guys. A few other things that you want to think about when you are recording podcast episodes. It's really important to find a quiet room to work in to really limit your background noise. Now, you know, I have a 9-year-old. I love him to pieces, but he's loud, especially if he's got a friend over or if he's watching YouTube, you'll get the cutest giggles in the background. Because of that, I very, very seldom record when he's at home with me. I generally do my recordings when he's at school. In the summers, I do it when he's at summer camp. I do try to batch my content. That's another tip that I have for you is batching your content helps you immensely. So I am batch recording 4 episodes for the month of January. It's honestly, if we're being honest, it is December 3rd. I'm trying to get this wrapped up before kiddo is on holiday break and home with me for a couple of weeks, and I don't want to miss a beat. I want to make sure that when you come back from holiday, you have podcast episodes waiting for you. So it's important to do that. Batching makes a difference for me. And when I say batching, I go through and I generate my ideas one day and I map out my calendar and then I sit down and I record 4 episodes at a time. I set aside an hour or 2 and I record my episodes and then I'll go back and I'll update them and I'll optimize them and I'll make sure that the blog posts are good and I'll put the links in with the video or the audio clip and all of that at another time. But by working on the same thing for 4 episodes at once, it makes it faster. And the reason I love batching, I got sick in November. I got very, very sick and I had a cough for 5 weeks. And it made it really hard to record anything because when I would talk, I would start coughing. But I didn't have to panic because I had already batched out all of my podcast episodes through the end of the year. So even though I couldn't record because of being sick and then because of having that cough, everything worked out fine. So I really like to be ahead of the curve with my podcast batching. A couple other things you want to think about are going to be your show notes. What are you going to do for show notes? I always recommend that you do a show notes blog post style page. You also want to think about your cover art. What are you going to do? Are you going to do SEO on your podcast? And then how are you going to launch and grow your podcast? Now, if you want more information on this, I will put the link to the blog post that is the show notes blog post page here, the blog post that accompanies this. It's going to walk you through how to think a little more about your cover art, your SEO. If you are going to launch a podcast, make sure you do it with SEO in mind. Get the beginner's guide to podcast SEO. It's at the freebies tab at the website. Sign up for Simple Podcast SEO. I am going to teach live in April. I'm going to do a podcast SEO free course, and then we will go through Simple Podcast SEO as a group starting in early April. So if you're thinking about launching it, go ahead and get started, start doing your research, figuring out what you want to do, and then mark your calendar, and we will work on that together starting in April. All right, that's it for today. I know there were a lot of you who said, I don't have a podcast yet. I want to start one, but I'm not sure how to do. So hopefully you found this very helpful, and I will see you back here next week. Bye for now. That's all for today's episode of the Simple SEO Content Podcast. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you visit my website, etchedmarketing.com, and visit the freebies tab. Right there, you're going to find the SEO Content Quick Start Guide along with the free SEO class. So you'll have everything you need to know to get started with SEO and content marketing. Then do me a favor, if you wouldn't mind, if you would do a rating and a review of this podcast on your favorite platform. That would really help spread the message, and I do greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can always DM me on Instagram at Etched Marketing Academy, and I will see you right back here next week.